This is Rabbi Yosef Feld. Thank you so much for joining me on this, I guess you could call it podcast presentation called The Sacred Work of Love. I want to start, first of all, by giving a tremendous thank you to Ray for giving me this opportunity to work together with you, to connect with you, to share ideas and share Torah thoughts with you. And let's begin to dive into this. This is the sacred work of love, and we're going to talk a lot about relationships, about marriage, but relationships and marriage are also ultimately two individuals. The more developed, the more worked on, the more each one has grown to become a person that could stand on their own emotionally, maturity-wise, the more that relationship that is the two of them is going to work out, and it's going to be successful. And we're going to be talking about some Torah ideas, some psychology ideas for making relationships great. However, we're going to focus heavily, because we're dealing with real life, on how to bring relationships that are struggling back from their struggle. I want to build on that thank you that I said right at the beginning by adding one more reason why I think that this podcast is special beyond the content of the podcast, beyond the material that I'm going to present to you. To me, the sacred work of love, that podcast is taking place on sacred ground. It's Avoda Kodesh, sacred work, but we're on Admas Kodesh. We're on sacred ground. And why are we on sacred ground? We're on sacred ground because this is a domain. I'm giving this talk on a domain, on a space where there are people that are not Jewish, that are of the 70 nations, of the Noahide nations, but they're coming to a space where they want to hear a Torah perspective, a Jewish perspective. And that's very profound to me. That's something that's really meaningful and deep, that I want to expand on that for a little bit. We live in times that are very tumultuous. We live in times that many people suggest that the events that are unfolding, the very different and very overwhelming geopolitical circumstances that we're living through, they're just indicative of something, of a higher plan that's unfolding. We live in uncertain times, and for the last, at least since COVID, the world has lived in uncertain times. We've seen a tremendous assault, horrific assault, be unleashed on the Jewish people, a physical assault, a 7-front war, and in tandem with that, an 8th front, as Prime Minister Netanyahu says, where the Jewish people are once again have been slandered. And yet, despite this incredible attack from all sides, somehow, within the sadness, within the despair, we see protection of Hashem on the Jewish people. But I think that in some ways, as much as we look at what's going on, we see Hashem pulling the strings of history with COVID, with all the tumult and all the political confusion and conflict that there is in America. And how America turned from a government that was so left to a government that's now to the right. I think one of the greatest indicators of messianic times, one of the perhaps most important events, and yet seemingly so innocuous, is this event right here. Our non-Jewish people coming to learn about life, to learn about relationships, to learn about topics that really matter, and coming to hear about it from a Jewish Torah perspective. Not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, we throughout the synagogues, we're going through the Torah cycle, the yearly Torah cycle, where one portion of the Torah is read each week over the 52 weeks of the year. And we read about the battle. You could call it the first wrestling match, recorded wrestling match in history, that took place between Yaakov, Jacob, and the angel of Esav. The Torah narrates how Yaakov went back. He was left alone. He went back, Jacob, our forefather, he went back to get some things from the other side of the river, I believe the Jordan River. And he was attacked by this angel. And it was night. And they fought the whole night. And that battle of Jacob fighting with the angel of Esau, of his brother, meant to be so close to him, but yet they were so distant. That battle is symbolic. It's allegorical. And it's a symbol, say Torah thinkers, of the battle that will take place between Yaakov, the children of Yaakov, the ideas of Yaakov, the life perspectives of Yaakov, and Esau, Esav, the spirit of Esav, the perspective of Esav. So, the outlook of Yaakov is a spiritual one. It's one that's about kindness, about compassion, about faith, about family, about children. And the outlook of Esau is about violence, about promiscuity. It's about elevating violence as an ideal. It's about the self being unsubordinate, free to do what one wants. And that battle, the battle of perspectives, the battle of ideals, is to rage throughout the long night of exile, throughout the long nights of the world struggling and floundering and slowly evolving to its culmination as a world of holiness. And right before the morning begins, or we could say right when the night ends, that's when the battle ends. When the battle ends between Yaakov, between the nation of Yaakov, the ideals of Yaakov, when that clash between those ideals and the ideals of Esav, when Esav begins, when the children of Esav begins to turn towards Yaakov, that is the dawn. That's when we know that the light is coming, the ultimate light that the world was meant to experience, the light of holiness, of happiness, of compassion for self and for others. That light is going to be born. So with that, I say to you, I thanked Ray already, but I want to thank you, my audience, because I know that my audience are people that are not Jewish, but are thirsting to hear the word of Hashem. People that may have grown up with exposure to other value systems, to a world that's dominated still so many years later by the ideals, by the passions, and the approach of Esav. And you grew up in that world, but you're reaching towards the dawn, and by doing so, you're ushering in the dawn. So this isn't just an event. This is, I believe, is part of a transformation of history. So, with that being said, having expressed my gratitude to Ray for giving me this opportunity and for all the work that he's done to make this a reality, and having expressed my gratitude to you, my listeners, let's begin to talk about the sacred work of love. And let's also go back to the Torah. The Torah starts from the beginning of creation. And famous commentator Rashi, one of the most foundational commentators, said, the Torah could have started from the story of the Jewish people. It didn't have to give the whole background. The story of the Jewish people is when history is really beginning, because that's the historical struggle of the Jewish people to influence and reach out to and ultimately shape a better world. But it didn't start with the Jewish people in Egypt or the Jewish people being taken out of Egypt. It started with individuals. It started with an Adam. It started with a Noach. It started with an Abraham, with an Avram, and it started with a Sarah. But if you think into it, it also started with the story of families. Noach wasn't saved alone. He was saved with his family. And the Torah goes into detail of the relationship between Abraham and Sarah, between Rebekah and Isaac, and between Yaakov, Jacob, and his wives. And I think the message is clear that nations, history, evolving towards the good place that it's meant to evolve, towards the successful culmination, spiritual culmination that it's meant to progress towards. That happens through individuals, worked on individuals that made good choices, that developed self-awareness, developed faith, developed a yearning to live a life of kindness, of compassion, of holiness, of goodness, blending physicality and spirituality in the way that only us humans could do. And that individual creates a family. Two such individuals can create a wonderful family. And from that wonderful family could grow an amazing community and eventually a society. So the Torah is affirming the value of family. The whole first book of the 5 books of the Torah, the whole first book, the book of Bereshit, that we just finished last week, testifies and is a testimony to the value, to the preciousness of a family, and to the pivotal role that a family plays in anything and everything that is going to be good about this world. So once again, I say to you, the sacred work of love, that's the name of this podcast, but it's happening on sacred ground, Admas Kodeshi, because the sacred work of building a family with all and against all the odds of the times, all the challenges of the times that we live in, all the forces of Esav that don't want that family. Doesn't want those family values. Wants any values but family values. That's doing that work, doing that hard work, that hard, difficult work of building a family, of nurturing a family. That is what holiness grows out of. And I heard a line that was, I think, kind of sums it up as well, from a thinker named Dag Hammarskjöld. He was, I think, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I don't mean to say I feel bad, referencing them, because they have been so nice and unfair to the truth recently, and more than just recently. But he said a beautiful line. He said that it's more noble to dedicate oneself fully to one individual than to labor for the salvation of the masses. And I think that there's a resonance there, that dealing with one person, dealing with one family member, and trying to truly love that family member, trying to truly make decisions that are good for that family member and for the family in general, can test our hearts and our souls. It can challenge our character, our values and ideals in a way that perhaps nothing else could. So let's begin the sacred work of love. For those that are coming here for help with your marriage, I want to encourage you. The marriage relationship is a sensitive matter. It's a sensitive matter. And there's a lot of vulnerability in reaching out for support, in showing up. Yet, we all need support. The family is one of those, to use the words of the Talmud, things that everyone needs support in. And the value of marital harmony, with the positive consequences for the entire family that flow out of it, and as I said, for the greater than the family, is well worth it. So I want to commend your courage in making the choice to be here. So, who's going to gain from this podcast? Really, everyone. Because to be a good husband, a good wife, to be a effective, caring, compassionate family member, to cultivate a successful family, one needs to be, as I said, a meaningful, successful, value-based, secure individual. And we're going to talk about that as part of the journey to cultivate and heal, if it needs healing, your relationship, is to begin by healing yourself. And if you're just starting out in a relationship and looking to do it right, to avoid pitfalls, you will gain a lot from this. But that being said, I'm going to focus a lot on distressed marriages. One of the tools that the Torah is interpreted through. There's 13 tools that the Torah is interpreted using. It's basically a way to reconstruct the Torah Shabbal Peh. Hashem gave the Torah, the written Torah, to Moshe, but he gave him the oral Torah to Moshe, but he encoded the oral Torah, the oral Torah, the unwritten Torah, that explains the written Torah. He encoded it into the Torah so it can be reconstructed using 13 tools of analysis, 13 forms of analysis. And one of them is called the Kal V'chomer, which basically says included in 200 is 100. If an idea will work for someone, if an idea of how to play baseball will help someone that's an amazing athlete, well, it might not help me. But if an idea of how to play baseball will help someone that's all thumbs, that's awkward, that's lanky, that's not coordinated, it will certainly help the person that is coordinated, that is athletic. That's the Kal V'chomer. Now, that person may not need the idea, but if it's something that they're missing, it'll be easy for them to put into place. So if these ideas, I'm going to be focusing a lot on the distressed marriage, but they certainly, Kal V'chomer, they certainly can enhance even the marriage that's not distressed. And marriage is one of those things that could always use work. It could always use enhancement. So we're going to talk about some of the things we're going to cover tonight. We'll probably start. I'm going to stop about 10:15. So some of the things we're going to cover are the 3 stages of a distressed relationship and how a marriage devolves, it disintegrates through those stages of distress. And we're going to discuss what are some of the underlying factors that cause a marriage to spiral through the 3 stages. What are the psychological factors, the attachment science that causes a marriage to regress, that causes a marriage to get into a vicious cycle of conflict? And then, perhaps next week, we're going to discuss how to identify conditions, mental health conditions that you or your spouse may be struggling with that causes you or them to act in painful ways. And when you understand the conditions, you can A, get help for the condition, and B, you could compensate for the condition. So let's begin. We're going to talk about the 3 stages of a distressed marriage. I'm going to read to you from an article I wrote called The Closeness to Pain Journey. If you've ever woken up in the quiet of the night with a heavy heart, wondering how the marriage you once dreamed of turned into a confusing, exhausting struggle, you're not alone, and you're not imagining the depth of the pain. One moment you're flooded with resentment towards your spouse for the distance, the criticism, or the chaos, and the next, a wave of love reminds you of the person you fell in love with and the family you still long for. Some days, depression settles in like a fog, with that feeling that this is a never-ending ordeal with no way out. And other days, you blame yourself, convinced that you're doing something wrong. So let's ask the question again. How is it possible that a marriage that began with such closeness became the very thing that is causing so much pain? I want to follow now. I want to trace the journey of a close marriage as it breaks down and turns into a cycle of chronic pain. I'm going to outline the 3 stages of marital disintegration and the factors that contribute to them. And if hearing this resonates, if it's depressing, hold on to hope. Because part of this podcast, as we progress, we're going to talk about how you can undo that process, how you can turn it around, reverse it, and begin to build, rekindle the love that may be extinguished. So, close marriages, almost all marriages, begin with high levels of passion, idealism, positive sentiments. Partners idealize each other, and they maintain a favorable ratio of positive to negative interactions. The research says that in couples that are doing well, in relationships that are going well, there's about 5 times the amount of positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. And if you think about that, that's a lot. That's pretty good. 5 times. It's a ratio of 5 to 1. And you could imagine if there's 5 positive interactions for every negative one, you're going to have emotional connection. And you're going to have, and the couple's going to have that emotional bank account, that reserve emotional bank account, regardless of their material bank account. They're going to have that reserve emotional bank account from which and through which they can draw strength and stamina to resolve conflicts, usually using humor or empathy. However, what began as a vibrant, spontaneous relationship filled with those shared dreams and easy, that emotional attunement, that easy connection, a lot of times begins to erode in one way or the other under the weight of life. Stressors like financial burdens, parenting conflicts, in-law dynamics, career pressures, or even unexpected crises begin to pile up. The relationship becomes more transactional. You're dealing with problems together. There's less time to nurture that positive vibe. The love, there's less time and ability to nurture the love and closeness. And slowly, that close feeling, that effortless connection begins to diminish. And even there's annoyances, there's irritations, different personality styles are now emerging. And over time, actually, perceptual shifts occur. The brain of each couple begins to change a little bit, and they begin to interpret the actions of the other in different ways. They begin to anticipate. They begin to expect actions, behavior patterns that are not caring, that are not compassionate, that are not mutual. So slowly things begin to slip. There begin to be arguments. There begin to be fights. There begins to be resentment. There begins to be gridlock, what I call emotional gridlock, where each partner has their position around certain things and there's inflexibility. And there begins to be more of those. Gridlock begets more gridlock. Not being able to work out one issue causes you not to work out more issues. Because you now are seeing each other, the brain has changed. The chemicals in the brain have been altered, and you're now seeing each other as less as a friend and more as a competitor. Less as a partner and more as an adversary. And if that process continues, it could spiral more to the point where there is now suddenly a reverse imbalance where the negatives, the annoyances, the stressors are happening much more frequently than the positives, and the marriage begins to enter what I like calling the antagonistic phase. I hope you're not too familiar with the antagonistic phase, but I will say that it's normal even for good relationships to have a day or two of antagonism. But in a good relationship, the couple has the emotional maturity and the attunement that they could straighten out the wagon. They could straighten out the train. They can get it back on track. While in a relationship that's spiraling, in a relationship where this vicious cycle of conflict is out of control and the reactions are escalating, the couple is feeding on each other in a negative way, the antagonistic phase, it runs rampant and uncontrolled, and it continues to spiral. So the antagonistic phase, it's a minefield. It's a minefield. Simple disagreements spiral into global accusations. You always this, you never that. From there, it might explode into name-calling, sarcastic battles, eye-rolling contempt, slam doors, adrenaline, clear thinking is impossible. Now, good relationships could have fights. There could be a bad day. There could be a bad 3 days. But the couples are able to get it on track. And again, it goes to that balance versus imbalance. If 80% of the time, 90% of the time, you're doing good, there's mutual feelings of care, of compassion, there's positive vibes, you're doing okay. The 10%, it gets absorbed. But sadly, in a relationship where the antagonistic phase is ruling the roost, there might be a day or two here where things soften. Maybe there's a good conversation. And unfortunately, in some ways, that's more painful because then there's new hope that gets dashed again. But the very next day, it's right back to that really upsetting, hurtful, painful pattern. So the marriage starts close, but life stressors, diverse personality styles, and as we're going to see, emotional wounds that each couple brings to the table. Inability to handle their own stress, lack of self-care, and just distraction by the world at large, by the media at large, that doesn't believe in working hard, in trying to fix things. We live in a disposable world. If something's not good, you throw it out. So the marriage is spiraling. So can it get worse than the antagonistic phase? Kind of. Do you know what that other phase is? The other phase is the cold phase. That's the second phase. You could call it the suffer in silence phase. In the cold phase, the fire of conflict perhaps burns out, but so does any hope, any passion, and usually any intimacy. There's emotional numbness and parallel lives. Conversations dwindle to logistics. Intimacy fades. Resentment hardens into bitterness. Both spouses, if they're there, if they're seeing each other, both are usually feeling profoundly unloved, very alone in their own house. And they keep emotional distance as an unspoken strategy to avoid more injury. The couples may still stay together for financial reasons, for the children, but it's an emotional divorce, and there's underlying grief. And this frozen state can endure for a long time. And in some ways, as I said, it's more agonizing than the fights because there's no hope. There's a limbo of quiet despair. And for those who reach a breaking point, either because they just can't take that suffer in silence cold phase, or because the antagonistic phase is just too much for them to deal with. It's the worst. It's the worst because your home is supposed to be where you are most safe. And if you're living in a home where you're so emotionally unsafe, it's just the worst. So for those who reach a breaking point, the separation phase, that's the third phase of a distressed marriage. Antagonistic phase, the cold phase, and the separation phase. The separation phase emerges as a potential fork in the road. Some couples attempt physical distance or trial separations in the hope of gaining perspective, but they're not getting to the root of the problem. So the repair efforts often falter because the old roadblocks eventually resurface. As they try to reconciliate, the same unwitting patterns of invalidating feelings, defensive justifications, accusations without openness to the other side derails the progress, reignites the antagonism, plunges them back into the cold water. And ultimately, at one point, there's a divorce with often lasting scars, not just on the couple, but also on the children. So, the sacred work of love is about hope. It's about healing. Yes, we have to understand the reality of the problem, but I'm here to help and to offer you tools. So as we wind down for tonight, I would ask you just to be mindful if you're in a relationship. To be mindful, this could be, so to speak, what I call your voluntary homework. To be mindful of which phase do you think your relationship's at. Usually it's not so hard in some ways to know. Is your relationship at not distressed, which is awesome? You'll still learn tools and tips of how to be a more emotionally secure, spiritually connected person, and some pointers on how to get those fights when they do happen much shorter and quicker, and how to respond and how to navigate difficult moments. But if your relationship is distressed, where are you at? Do you feel it's more antagonistic or do you feel it's more cold? If it's separation, you kind of know. But do you feel it's more antagonistic or is it more cold? And remember to keep hope close. We're going to learn to heal. That's what you came here for. And that's what we're going to do together. So thank you so much for joining me tonight, whether you're live or you're hearing this through video. And I hope to see you next week as we continue the discussion.